Good day, everyone. Atheist.com is an incredible website that is loaded with information, debates, and stories concerning atheism and Christianity. This story from there that I want to share with you today is called From Atheism to Christianity by A.S. Jones. It begins. I was a devout atheist for about 20 years. I was raised a Roman Catholic. In my home, the name of Jesus Christ or God was never mentioned, and the concept of God was never really made completely real to me. In my early teens, I concluded that there was no God, and that science was the answer to all of our problems. I threw myself into my studies and determined to become a scientific messiah who would one day deliver people from the bondages of disease. At the age of 16, my IQ and my grades made me eligible for my high school's early release program, and I began my studies in biology and chemistry at the University of Pittsburgh. I graduated from college with high honors and my prized science degree, but something had happened. I had lost my motivation to apply that knowledge. I recalled one day staring at a swarm of a mass of termites and thinking, from a comparative distance, there was really very little difference between us and them. I smashed a dozen or so with my shoe and ground them into the dirt. What did it matter if these insects died? What did it matter if they all died? People died every day. The end result would always be death for both individuals and eventually the species. I read some philosophy books, mostly atheistic philosophers, such as Jean-Paul Sartre's Being and Nothingness, and other atheist philosophers who tried to assign meaning to a life created by chance. But I eventually decided that they were all just full of crap. If our life is the result of randomness and chance, it is meaningless, and no matter how we try to convince ourselves otherwise. Humanity had become to me nothing more than an organized network of molecules and enzymes. I viewed people as mere organisms going about their daily routines. I viewed people as sort of guinea pigs, and my chief form of entertainment was how I could see how skillfully I could manipulate them. I knew that I was supposed to care about people, but I didn't. I couldn't. If mankind's goal was to alleviate its own suffering, then a bullet to the head was more efficient and made more sense to my thinking than screwing around with medication and disease control. What was the point of prolonging anyone's life anyway? What difference did it make? If a girl didn't live to marry or her mother lived to see it, of what value were temporary emotional experiences anyway? They were simply the biochemistry of the brain reacting to sensory input, and upon an individual's death, any remaining memory of that existence is thrown away. My extreme point of view that had developed because of my atheism had reduced people to just throw away metabolic units. I had become as cold and indifferent as the logic that I exalted. If my education was going to benefit anyone, it was going to benefit me. I took a fairly high-paying job in a chemistry lab. My brain rotted there for 40 hours a week for the next 10 years. Life was indeed meaningless, and I was prepared to live my way by this, quote, truth, and discover that the prospect of a life without meaning can also be a very freeing experience, at least for a while. I set it to take advantage of this moral relativism, and effectively destroyed what was left of my conscience. I busied myself from one diversion to another, trying to fill my life with meaningless activity in order to forget how meaningless my life really was. In my desperation, I grew self-righteous and indignant. I was secretly envious of those morons who seemed oblivious to their own meaninglessness. I wanted to grab and shake people and wake them up, just to get them to know how really worthless and meaningless their lives were. The worst, it seemed, and those that I hated the most, were Christians, because of their ignorance of naturalism. They failed to see that there was really no reason for the rest of the world to believe in their God, or live by their standards, or to care about what they had to say. Yet there they were, acting as if they had the copyright upon all truth. Their pretentiousness sickened me, despite my being equally pretentious towards them. After all, I was justified in my pretentiousness. I began reading the Bible and studying it just so I could come up with arguments against Christianity and towards Christians. My anti-Christian arguments became my ultimate diversion to my hopeless life. I learned that religious debate wasn't as much about truth as it was about language and presentation. and the way that I made my arguments. But I began seeing flaws in my own logic while trying to demonstrate certain instances of biblical inaccuracy. To justify my desire to destroy Christianity, I had to find reasons to discredit. I railed about its so-called hypocrisies, the behavior of its followers, the wars fought in its name. I questioned the motives of its bloody God and the religious effective outcome. In short, I began seeing it as a supreme evil, despite the fact that my own view of moral relativism did not permit a logic defense or the concept of evil. But I kept asking myself, why didn't the Bible make sense to me, but it made sense to others? What were they seeing that I didn't? Did they so desperately want there to be a God that they deluded themselves into thinking that there was? In New Year's Day of 1998, I made a resolution to read the entire Bible again through the year. In the months that followed, I kept my resolution. But I began to notice a change in the way that I interpreted the Bible. Intellectually, I found that my mind could logically accept two very different interpretations of almost everything I was reading. One interpretation of any part could render the whole story as nonsensical, but another interpretation would cause it to make complete sense. And here was the question. If my mind was capable of accepting interpretations that allowed the whole book to make sense, then what was it in me that wanted it not to make sense? This book was reading me as surely as I was reading it. Every time I found a fault with its God, I ended up finding a fault of my own. What was I doing when I condemned this God for commanding Moses to kill? Was I arrogantly making my morality superior to that of a being who allegedly authored all morality? Was I condemning the actions of an entire nation which was trapped in a kill or be killed situation? What was it in me that wanted to express outrage at Jesus Christ for telling me that I had to give away everything to be considered worthy to follow him? Was it my own selfishness? For weeks I was on sort of a high, the type of high that comes about when one feels that he is on the edge of making some sort of profound discovery. I wasn't sure what I was discovering, but my perception of this world was changing. Then in July, I read these words of Jesus Christ, understanding them for the first time after having reading them many times through the years, where Jesus said, "Who do you say I am?" Then I saw it. What I had to say about who Christ was said more about me than it did about him. At this moment I saw it. I saw what the truth of the Bible was, and I was humbled. The truth wasn't about cud-chewing bunnies or how much precipitation fell during Noah's flood. It was the truth about human nature and our efforts to rise above it. It was the truth about the human spirit being led by divine spirit. It was the truth about each of us, imperfect in our love to another, needing to be made complete by the perfect love of God. The truth was about how one man without sin had died for us so that we could live. The truth of the Bible was and is Jesus Christ. I had been a fool. I had paraded around thinking myself to be the sophisticate, oblivious to the trail of toilet paper clinging to my shoe. My accusing fingers turned around and pointed straight at me. I sucked. Christianity wasn't what was wrong with the world. A lack of education wasn't what was wrong. I was what was wrong with the world. I began to pray for forgiveness to a God whose existence I had thought was intellectually indefensible. But he was very, very real. Within days, almost every viewpoint I had once so loudly announced changed. I could no longer justify my advocacy about abortion, homosexuality, premarital sex, etc., because I realized that these options for what they really were, that being selfishness. But the most astounding change that took place in me was that I was freed from my cold indifference in matters of the heart. The more I emptied myself of myself, the clearer the truth became. It had been my own selfish sin that kept me from seeing it before, and Jesus Christ became my God and my grand obsession. I was dead, but Christ woke me up. He saved me from my selfish self, and I have given myself to Him because I am thankful for what He has given me.